February next year, when a case challenging its legality will be heard.
And meanwhile, approve a government plan to put Nairobi's landmark, the KICC, up for sale, alongside 10 other government parastatals, including Kenya Pipeline Company and the new KCC.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of Morning Cafe. It is maybe 27 days to Christmas, but it is only 2 days to the end of the month, payday, around the corner. Chunga sana, mwezi ya sherehe imefika. Anyway, this is Morning Cafe. Today the weather in Nairobi looks a bit dicey. Highs of 24 degrees Celsius, lows of 15 degrees, 60% chance of rain. So do plan yourself. My name is Freddie Ndimuli. How hot is a coffee where you are?
Well, I'm Flora Limukin. Of course, even as we mark the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, there is a group of people living with disabilities that is often unnoticed and in most cases even underreported, and that is the conversation we'll be having at around 8 a.m. to just create awareness even when it comes to matters gender-based violence against people with disabilities, in order to make sure there is no imbalances when it comes to reporting these perpetrators of such incidences. Flora Lemuke, I didn't say my name again, okay. Be part of this conversation at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe.
Well, I'm used to Stanley Nyeringita. Because we are all talking about, tightening our belts and people who are wearing very expensive belts, my proverb comes from that. A good reputation is worthier than a golden belt. A good reputation is worthier than a golden belt. Think about that. This particular morning, we'll be talking about matters multi-media art and all that. Matters the whole art. Very interesting guest will be joining us for that conversation. But first, to the big story.
To our top story now. The government has finally laid out a formal plan to respond to the effects of the El Nino severe weather that has so far killed about 76 Kenyans and left over 35,000 households displaced. An emergency cabinet meeting on Monday, chaired by President William Ruto, came up with several interventions to help mitigate the effects of the El Nino on Kenyans. Statehouse spokesman Hussein Mohammed says the government has allocated 7 billion shillings to address the effects of the rains and will be seeking approval from Parliament for further allocations. Meanwhile, another cabinet committee has been set up on disaster response to be chaired by Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. Now, 38 out of 47 counties have been classified as being within the alarm stage, characterized by flash floods, general flooding in low-lying plains, rivers bursting their banks, landslides and mudslides, loss of livestock and destruction of farmland and infrastructure. All right, let's now take a look at the day's diary before we delve into the dailies.
Well, and on today's diary, we start with the Kenya Innovation Week. And the Kenya Innovation Week 2023, dubbed the Commonwealth Edition, enters day 2 today, as it aims at uniting top experts and innovators to share insights for navigating uncertain times, and even as we continue to deal with the emerging technologies. And it will be marked by inspiring keynote speakers, panels, as well as workshops. And the 16 days of activism continues as we enter day 4 today. And the 16 days of violence enter day 4 as the world creates awareness on matters violence against women and girls, and for giving solutions to deal with the menace, even as we focus on matters people with disabilities today. And state to start collecting public views on privatization of several parastatals, including KICC, KPC, KLB, among other 11 state corporations. Elsewhere, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua is meant to meet with the ad hoc committee on emergency response towards El Nino. And finally, the 3-judge bench led by David Majanja will today deliver the verdict on the Finance Act 2023.
Yes, and that's planned sale of the KICC has caused quite some uproar, and it forms part of our question today. This morning we ask, do you agree with the government's plan to sell KICC? Well, it also features on the front pages. Let's start off with the Standard. Before we get to the KICC, the big headline on the Standard this morning: mass sackings loom as NHIF changes begin. Tough times. Health Cabinet Secretary Susan Nahumicha has told health fund workers their jobs are not guaranteed. In the new scheme, in 2 months, those to leave will receive their letters. That story is on page 6. Of course, the High Court has slammed the brakes on implementation of the new SHIF fund, but NHIF mass sackings loom. And the photo there of the CS saying, give me a structure that will help me to answer many questions regarding whether jobs are guaranteed or not. That's a CS. And a photo of NHIF employees during a meeting with the CS on the new Social Health Authority, SHA, to provide an update on the new changes at the NHIF headquarters. That was yesterday. The other big story given prominence on the front page of the Standard today: what Ruto-Raila proposals on law mean to hustlers. This has to do with the National Dialogue Committee report that was presented to the principals on Saturday. And some of the proposals on cost of living, less travel by government officials, an increase in top executive offices, reduction in fuel prices, collapse of government institutions, increase of allocation to counties, and audit of last year's presidential elections. Whereas the report by the dialogue team has been received with heavy undertones, a peek inside shows elaborate plans to trim government spending and enhance funding to counties for development. That story is on page 4 of the Standard. And yes, the other story featured prominently on the front page of the Standard: inside Ruto's plan to sell KICC Kenya Pipeline. The government has announced plans to sell 11 more state agencies, including the Kenyatta International Convention Center and the cash-rich National Oil, as well as Kenya Pipeline. Stories on page 2, causing quite some uproar, especially on social media. On the inside pullout of Financial Standard: banking in time of crisis. Other highlights are on the top strip of the Standard. On the national pages, parents in court want Form 1 selection halted. That's on page 3. Elsewhere, Cabinet sets aside 7 billion shillings for floods, page 7. On the international pages, UAE planned to use COP28 on oil deals. And in sports, Leopards struggle to regain form. If we could flip To the back page of the Standard now. Sekafa semi-finals at stake as Junior Stars face Rwanda. Kenya play Rwanda from 12 p.m. today at Jomo Kenyatta Stadium in Kisumu. Babu ready to guide calm Kenyan juniors to Sekafa glory. And a photo there of Kenya Junior Stars huddling in celebration after their win against Sudan. Yes, the two matches to be played today, Kenya versus Rwanda and Somalia versus Sudan at 3 p.m. Other sports highlights, Xavi calls on Barca fans for vital tie with Porto. Yes, matters Champions League. A number of games playing to be played today. Lazio versus Celtic, Shakhtar versus Antwerp, SC Milan versus Borussia Dortmund, Young Boys versus Slavia Zvezda, Barcelona versus Porto, Feyenoord Atletico Madrid, Man City versus RB Leipzig, and PSG to face Newcastle United. So for lovers of the Champions League, quite some good matches to look forward to today. And that's the Standard this morning.
Well, let's have a look at the Daily Nation this morning. The top headline there, similar one to what we have on the Standard. Court suspends new health plan. And a judge yesterday granted orders halting the implementation of the Social Health Insurance Fund Act, the Primary Health Care Act, and the Digital Health Care Act, dealing a blow to President William Ruto's push to effect a new health plan that seeks to make it mandatory for every family to contribute a percentage of their income to the fund. And that is a story on page 4 of the Daily Nation. Another story there, Raila queries KCPE integrity as parents assume, and over 200 parents from 2 private primary schools have moved to the High Court seeking declaration of the premises of the NEC as crime scene as a petition for the temporary suspension of Form 1 selection exercise. And pictured there is Ryan Kibet. This is a candidate in last year's KCPE exams from Kitengela International School, accompanied by other pupils and their parents and lawyers as they addressed journalists yesterday at the High Court in Nairobi after they filed a petition seeking orders to stop Form 1 selection because of discrepancies in the marking of the exams. And pupils from SET, Green Hill Academy and their parents are also part of the suit. Yes, let's have a look at what's on the lower strip of the Daily Nation. Up for sale, State seeks to privatize 11 parastatals. This includes Moya Rice Millers, Kenya Seed Company Limited, Rivertex East Africa Limited, Kenya Pipeline Company, National Oil Corporation, Kenya Literature Bureau, and Numerical Machining Complex, and Kenya International Convention Center, KICC. Away from that, on the right strip of the Daily Nation, doctor who refused to perform unnecessary test awarded 16 million shillings. And relief for President William Ruto's ICC closes probe into Kenya's 2007 post-poll violence. The ICC Deputy Prosecutor Nasat Shamim said her office will not pursue additional cases into alleged crimes. Still on the right strip of the Daily Nation, Samatta's El Nino, their governors get 10 billion shillings for disaster response. The cabinet yesterday refused to declare the ongoing El Nino rains a national disaster, even as it rolled out measures to respond to the unfolding humanitarian crisis. So far, 38 counties are now affected by the rains that have so far led to the death of more than 70 people and displaced 35,000 households. And that is the story on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's have a look at what we have on the back page of the Daily Nation. Same story that we had on the top page. Their schools moved to court as KCPE integrity questioned. And lawmakers summon Minet boss over poor services for teachers. Some matter sports there. Kenya's junior stars ready to dazzle again in their second CECAFA U18 Boys Championship match against Rwanda today in Kisumu. And that's the Daily Nation this morning.
Tuangazie gazeti la Taifa leo, baadhi ya vidokezo ambavyo vijaonyeshwa kuangaziwa katika gazeti la Daily Nation na pia Standard. Na Taifa leo yauliza atasimama na raia, na wamechapisha picha ya kiongozi wa ODM pale, Raila Odinga akiwa amevalia suti la kaunda. Wasema njia panda. Wenzake ndani ya Azimio kama vile Karua na Wamalwa wamepinga mapendekezo ya ripoti ya kamati ya maridhiano, hadi masuala ya tata kama vile gharama ya juu ya maisha yashughulikiwe kikamilifu. Mengi ni katika ukurasa wa pili. Aidha wadokeza kuwa Raila ajipata pagumu ama akimbilie mnofu wa maridhiano au amsukume Ruto apunguze gharama ya maisha. Tuelekee pale juu, masuala ya kitaifa na pia elimu. Israel yaua kamanda wa Hamas. Utawala wa Gaza wasema jemedari wake ameuawa licha ya maufaka. Katika ukurasa wa 8, huku nchini Kenya, KCPE yenye ulaghai yashtakiwa baada ya kukiri kutenda makosa tele katika usahilishaji wa mtihani wa kitaifa. Katika ukurasa wa 3, hii ndio nchi ya Kenya ambayo tuishi.
Kenya yetu, nchi yetu, tuipenda daima.
Pale chini, masuala ya El Nino, serikali yazinduka yazipa kaunti shilingi bilioni 10. Baada ya majibizano makali baina ya naibu rais Rigathi Gachagua na magavana kadhaa kuhusu kutolewa kwa pesa za El Nino, hatimaye serikali ya kitaifa imeidhinisha pesa hizo zitumiwe kwa serikali za kaunti ili zisaidie kukabiliana na madhara ya mvua kubwa inayoonyesha. Kenya yetu daima hii. Majibizano kisha muafikiana. Masuala ya michezo tukimalizia katika gazeti la Taifa leo. UEFA, PSG, Newcastle ni kufa kupona. Barcelona yaalika Porto, huku Dortmund ikizuru AC Milan. Man City ni kufunga kazi tu, kurasa wa 20. Na hiyo ndio gazeti la Taifa leo. Nchini Kenya tutapata na shilingi 30 pale TZ, bila 500 upate gazeti hili.
Aye. Let's take a look at the Star, the front page of the Star. Raila calls crisis meet as Azimio split over report. That's a big headline on the front page of the Star this morning. It does not address the lowering, the way forward on the report. It does not address lowering the cost of living. Individual MPs from Odinga camp have termed it underwhelming. The other story given prominence on the front page, photos there of the kind of destruction on sections of the roads. Ruto's cabinet unveils plan to deal with the raging floods. And yes, massive flooding on quite a number of roads, bridges destroyed, especially in the northeastern region. Yes, and that image of that imposing Nairobi landmark, the KICC. Next to that story, Kenya Pipeline and KICC among 11 state firms lined up for sale. Big talking point. The other highlights down there, Kenyan man stuck in Mexican hospital after severe burns. Those are the main stories on the front page. There, the highlight is on the top strip. Matters local politics. Natembeya drops DP Gachagua's name in fallout with his deputy. That story is on page 8, and that's the front page of the Star this morning.
Let's look at the People Daily. The top headline there, state pledges cash in matters floods and governors' protest pay off as cabinet allocates billions for emergency response against heavy rains as death toll climbs. Move comes after county bosses accused government of failing to disburse the funds, and that is the story on page 4 of the People Daily. The numbers there, 76 is the number of people who have lost their lives as a result of floods, and over 600,000 others are threatened with displacement. 35 households have been displaced by the heavy rains that continue to pound various parts of the country. And 150,000 is the number of mosquito nets will be distributed to counties prone to malaria in campaign to fight new infections. Yes, and 180 million shillings is the value of medical supplies that the government will lift to Wajir County with assistance of KDF. And 10 billion shillings is the amount that will be allocated to county governments to deal with floods after governors protested. And 7 billion shillings is the amount in contingency funds that government has allocated to deal with El Nino. On the top strip of the People Daily, ICC prosecutor finally terminates Ruto case. That is the story on page 14 on Newsbeat there. Other stories on the People Daily, the right strip, Raila to lead protest if talks falter. And another story there, still on matters KCPE, parents sue over KCPE. And that's the People Daily this morning.
Let's talk money matters now, and on the Business Daily, the big story, 200 billion cash shillings assets rich, but as Statehouse put on sale, and 11 entities to be privatized in IMF-backed divestiture plan. Kenya Pipeline, KICC, among the most lucrative. And I'm taking a look at, all this particular parastatals, and the one common, parastatal that, Kenyans really relate to is KICC. I mean, people even pay to go to just see KICC. You told, pay this particular money, we're going to see KICC. Growing up, it has been that one place that really resonates. So, I mean, Kenyans are worried.
Well, the thing is, no one is going to come and carry it away, but concerns are rife that, okay, fine, if you sell it 100%, then whoever buys it decides, I think I need a better building here. Absolutely. Or something different. Then what happens? Are there plans to ensure that that landmark is protected, that it stays there, and it's not interfered with? I think that's the biggest concern.
Absolutely, because it just represents history to us. And I'm just imagining whoever buys it out and you just decide, I need to modernize even this in terms of infrastructure. Now where will you go on that rooftop, that romantic rooftop where every campus person has to go to take pictures there?
It reminds me, I think I should visit that rooftop.
Before,
yes. Other stories on the Business Daily, on the bottom strip. Top banks set aside 62 billion cash shillings, anticipate record defaults. That is on what is bad loans. More on that is on page 2. On the right side, that ticker, former EAPCC workers allowed seize 1.3 billion cash shillings. That is the East Africa Portland Cement Company, which has suffered a blow after the Court of Appeal failed to lift an order obtained by former workers, attaching its bank accounts of a debt of 1.3 billion Kenyan shillings. And just below that, 2 EPZ firms to fire 7,850 employees. Wow. The Ministry of Labour has summoned the management of 2 EPZ factories in Mombasa over the impending layoff of 7,850 staff next month. And in matters markets and finance, online forex brokers hit with a new tax. The Treasury has introduced a regulatory fee on online forex brokers, opening an extra revenue stream for the Capital Market Authority, that is CMA. And finally, on the Pullout magazine of life, ABCs of building a hanging garden. That is on page 19. You're about to have some free time during this festive season. You can take a look at that and see how to have a hanging garden. That is the front page of Business Daily.
Okay, yesterday we did not look at the East African, and since it's a week-long paper, we can just have a quick glance on the front page of the East African. The new kid on the block, Somalia, has been admitted to EAC, but the real journey begins now as it seeks to put its house in order and domesticate crucial protocols for trade. Extensively covered on pages 4, 6, 14, and 17. If at all you've been following matters EAC and Somalia's inclusion, a lot of details there. The other big highlights on the front page of the East African, it's official. EA troops will exit Congo soon. Elsewhere, Devki takes over Kigali cement farm. And that's the front page of the East African.
Well, still in East Africa, let's have a look at the Daily Monitor in Uganda this morning. The top headline, their government sets new terms for land registration. And still on the Daily Monitor, battle for Muslim property, Kimba out on bail. Let's have a look at the left strip of the Daily Monitor this morning. House walks opposite sides on Speaker's orders on MPs. And another story there, Catholic Church mourns priest killed in car crash. Still on the Daily Monitor, the very top strip, UNEP recruits 14,000 markers for PLE and USA. That is what we have on the Daily Monitor in Uganda this morning.
Tuelekee Bongo na masuala ya Kiingereza bado ya tesa watainio. Tulikuwa na taarifa hiyo pale jana ikiangazia jinsi masuala ya Kiingereza yanavyowatatiza wa Tanzania, na hiyo ndio baadhi ya vidokezo ambavyo viko katika gazeti la Mwananchi. Taarifa nyingine, makali ya nauli za mabasi daladala. LATRA yapitisha nauli za mabasi kwenda mikoani daladala kuanzia Disemba 8 mwaka huu. Kupaa gharama za uendeshaji mafuta vyatajwa, huko wachumi na wadau wakionya mfumuko wa bei mkali wa maisha. Kuangazia tu pale kiwango cha ukomo cha nyongeza ya nauli za daladala kutoka kituo hadi kituo. Nauli hizo zimepanda kati ya shilingi 100 za Tanzania hizo hadi 300 kwa safari, ikilinganishwa na nyongeza za kikomo kwa safari za mikoani. Safiri wa mabasi za daraja la kawaida, nauli imepanda kutoka shilingi 41,000 shilingi 41.29 kwa kilomita hadi shilingi 53. Luxury kipanda hadi shilingi 67 kutoka 56. Taarifa nyingine pale juu, serikali ya kwama kielelezo cha video cha kataliwa kotini. Kidekezo ambacho kimekuwa katika gazeti hili kwa siku kadhaa sasa, na hiyo ndio gazeti la Mwananchi.
Okay, and let's now take a look at the Citizen. And the big story there, new EU envoy lists key areas of strategic partnership. The European Union's new ambassador to Tanzania and the East African community, Kristen Grau, has shared insights into key areas of cooperation and spoken about the global energy challenge, human rights, rule of law, and financing of SMEs. That's a big headline on the Citizen in Tanzania today. The other story, festive season comes with higher bus fares. Commuters and travelers will have to dig deeper into their pockets from this festive season after the Land Transport Regulator raised bus fares across board. And yes, 27 days to Christmas. Hiyo ndio hali. Harmonized government development plan says Biteko, that's the other highlight. And on the top strip, 25 women girls set for free reconstructive surgery. Those are the big stories on the Citizen in Tanzania today.
Turejea nchini Kenya and angazia masuala ya caricature on page 17 of the Daily Nation, page 16 of the Standard, and as always page 10 of the People Daily. On page 17 of the Daily Nation, focusing on says House of Cards, and a number of gentlemen there. They're probably playing cards. There's a common Mwananchi there also. And on your screens is People Daily. Well, you can take a look at People Daily because it's on the screen before we cross over to the Daily Nation, which is on page 17. On People Daily, another drowning victim. That's the 1 shilling.
The shilling drowning in floods.
Yes.
That's a good...
Steno's take.
Yes. It draws parallels with what we are suffering with the flooding situation, as well as a dwindling Kenya shilling.
and the free fall there. That is on page 17 or page 10 of People Daily. On page 17 of
the Daily Nation, House of Cards, matters by partisan talks. Everything cards on top of the table. Actually, the table has just been thrown off balance. So the cards are everywhere. Everyone is talking. People agreeing, people disagreeing, others being accused of doing one thing or the other. Everyone talking, agreeing and disagreeing. So it's just pure chaos. House of Cards, matters by partisan talks.
On the Standard, the cartoon on the Standard this morning, just talking matters, workers there, and pictured Atuli there, who is the Kotu boss. And he says, I'm taking my workers to the 23rd century. And I think this revolves around some of the changes he made recently over the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
That's good. It was curious why he had to have him as a frog. Probably jumping from one.
I think he has also been appointed to the Social Security Board or something.
Yes, as a representative of the workers from the court, which is the biggest union bringing together all other unions. He definitely sits on NSSF, NHIF, and now SHIF or SHA boards. That is to be expected. Well, those are the dailies today, headlines not just in Kenya but around the region of East Africa. We'll be looking at some of these headlines with my panelists after the break. Remember our question today, do you agree with the government's plan to sell the KICC? Yes, there are many government parastatals that have been put up for sale, but on this one, the KICC, do you agree? Give us your feedback on social media at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. After the break, we'll be having a panel. Let me just get the names. Francis Wanjiko, Head of Public Policy, IC Law, LLP. Daniel Orogo, Public Policy Analyst. John Wangunyu, Analyst, Mundalo Advice, National Youth Chairperson, Jubilee Party. They'll be in studio for these discussions. Do stand by for that. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Indemuli. We now want to get down and discuss the headlines on the dailies, matters to do with the National Dialogue Committee, as well as the privatization of state corporations. With me this morning is Daniel Orogo, political analyst. Good to have you in studio.
Good morning, Fred.
Also
Good
joining
morning
us,
to our viewers.
Also joining us is Francis Wanjiku, Head of Public Policy at IC Law LLP.
Thank you for the invitation.
Karibu sana. And John Wangunyu, political analyst. It's good to have you in studio.
Good morning, Fred. Thank you for the invite.
Karibuni sana. One more panelist could be joining us as we go along. But if you look at the dailies this morning, there appears to be a lot of concern about the privatization of state corporations, and I want us to start from there. 11 different corporations, some known, some not. But the biggest concern is around the KICC, because people believe this is a landmark to the country, and it's a premier conference center, not just in Kenya, but in the region. And is there anything to be lost? Probably that's the question. Is there anything to be lost by privatizing the KICC? Let's start with you, Francis.
Thank you, Fred. It's important to note that privatization has been on the books for a very long time. What has been the problem is implementation. Now that we have 11 state corporations on the table, it's a good time to have that conversation. I am a supporter of privatization because my theory is that we need a very lean government. We need a government that only focuses on the important issues in society. I want a government that focuses on defense. I want a government that focuses on security. So when you tell me a state corporation is running a convention center, that seems like a private sector issue. So therefore, I think Kenyans should support this. And what we should be insisting on is that this process goes on with full transparency and accountability, and that we get value for money. Mm-hmm. Yes. So what is important when you look at KICC is that KICC will not go anywhere. There are good examples of this. And if you've gone to Kigali, we have the Kigali Convention Center, which is run by a private sector player. And it has retained its form and shape, and therefore I don't think that by the very fact they are privatizing or leasing out KICC, it will change its benefit to Kenyans. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
John, a part of the concern is that this planned privatization could be to benefit some private interests. Do you share that concern? And if at all, what kind of interests are we talking about?
First of all, I want to make myself clear on this particular issue, that I do support the privatization. I support the privatization because we know that from a business theory that a private enterprise is better placed to run business than government, simply because of many sort of reasons, including patrimonial reasons and political reasons. So for that particular reason, I think it is important for us to understand that it makes perfect business sense from a theoretical standpoint that businesses should be run by business people, not necessarily government functionaries. So from that perspective, I think it's a good thing. The president has been on record, I think, early in the year, when he was launching he got the opportunity to ring the bell, so to speak, at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. And he promised Kenyans that he was going to make sure that the BAUS is expanded so that we have more businesses that are up for sale. That is a good thing because, of course, it gives the public opportunity to buy a piece of what is essentially good assets. So from that particular standpoint, I think it's a good thing. The big sort of worry for many people, and I can see where they're coming from, understanding how sometimes government affairs are run, there is the risk that these particular assets might not necessarily be open as in to the public. You might end up with a situation where vested interests will end up putting their money in those particular assets. And then we're going to end up with a hue and cry how we ended up with a situation that known government, sort of people with known connections in government, have ended up probably buying these things or these assets for what he said, for a song. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very, very careful. Reading the story, it is encouraging that they're saying it's going to be open before they settle on the final list, it's going to be open to public participation. I hope that they're going to engage professionals, including investment bankers, people who are competent in these matters from a legal standpoint. But I think as Kenyans we should celebrate, because this is an opportunity to invest in assets that essentially are, from the look of things, if you look at the 11, so on page 1, I'm seeing some interesting assets like National Oil Corporation, Kenya Pipeline, and then of course the KICC itself. Yeah. And we know the history of KICC, especially from back in the day when apparently it was appropriated by KANU. Mm-hmm. So for Kenyans to get an opportunity to buy into it, I think it's a good thing.
Okay. Daniel, do you share in any of these concerns?
Definitely. I think my colleagues have, have shared my concerns as well. Normally very skeptical about over privatization, because I think the dailies are putting these that maybe 100 were earmarked for privatization. They had contacted the financial health institution and listed 35. And then there was an additional 11 that now we are discussing today. Well, so privatization, the ideal is to have, to maybe make the running of these entities more efficient and reduce a lot of bureaucracies, but also, try to deal with the government wage bill on them. But I think, like my colleagues have said, that the idea is, the ultimate idea is to put these offers, because their conversation is either through initial public offers or being sold to private entities. Mm-hmm. And I think to that extent, it's quite important that this gets to the public opinion, because some of these particular institutions, like you said, are serious landmarks to this particular country. I mean, everyone traces, they are coming to Nairobi with KICC. And I could see a lot of concern before we go to set, as, people were reacting to your questions you were putting, whether, entities like KICC should be put on privatization. I mean, it's not only KICC. I have seen the Kenya Literature Bureau also, earmarked for privatization. I mean, Fred, you would see your primary and books and, secondary books that were just published by that firm. And so the tendency that there is the retention of institutional memory when they are handed over to a different management. Mm-hmm. And like you're mentioning, if a private developer or someone with an interest, acquire or secure the management of KICC, would Kenyans still have the pleasure, to also do their things as they do always? So I think for me is this is a proposal, and they're already earmarked and listed. But like I've said, where the space of the public to have their say into these whole processes. Through, because that has also been documented, that the ministry would actually issue a circular that puts the public also to have their view with regards to the government proposals. The other thing that has caught my attention, that the dailies has equally documented, that this is in line with the IMF's proposals, and even the privatization bill in the act that the Treasury is acting on is guided by the international standards. Mm-hmm. So I think that really raises a lot of eyebrows, because then you look at then what guides some of these fiscal policies that we are having, especially that which guides public and government private investments, and the transfer of those assets and the selling them to different entities, leaving hands from the public management to privatization. So I think there's still, like Wakili have said, this opens a discourse for once that we as a country, we also need to be engaged in this kind of conversation, that we do not leave it to the executives or to the state or to the government. But I think the public, just like they have been putting their input in all these particular proposals, it's time that we have a conversation on privatization.
And Francis, the concerns are clear that Kenyans are a bit skeptical because probably we do not understand the concept of privatization. We're used to nationalized corporations. And probably the concern is that if we cede too much ground on any of these entities, for example, the Kenya pipeline, that we used to transport oil from the port into the hinterland, that probably that could change the dynamics, and you leave it to the markets, and probably without reasonable government control, that would affect probably the economy. These are real concerns. Do you have any explanation that probably would alleviate some of these concerns?
I think the concerns might be misplaced because, in the first place, the public is not involved in the running of these state corporations. There are people who know barely anything that goes on within, whether it's the board or the management of a parastatal like Kenya Pipeline. Because what has happened over the past few years is that the state has kept on expanding from one parastatal to another. So today you form this parastatal, tomorrow you form another. So what has happened, it has diluted the kind of public participation within this state corporation. What might be a legitimate fear is the local communities around this parastatal. I can give an example of Kenya Ports Authority. You had initially, the government had announced that there were plans to privatize the Kenya Ports Authority. The communities around the coastal communities actually complained and made their views public to the president. And then that's how the president backtracked. So if you look at the organization listed, I don't think you can say there are actual communities which are affected when these assets or these companies are privatized. And this is because an asset like Kenya Pipeline comes all the way from Mombasa all the way to Eldoret. So is there any specific local community that is affected? No. What I am worried about is if the process is not made transparent, then the public will stand to lose the benefits of privatization. What I mean is, for instance, do we have the books of accounts of these parastatals for the last maybe 5 years? I have not seen them online. I think the last books of accounts are 2019-2020 audited books on the Auditor General website. So it means that if we lose the benefit of trading this company, let's say a share is being sold by 20 shillings and the real value is 50, then the public are going to lose. And this is money that the government can use to settle its debts. So I think one of the things the Treasury needs to do, it needs to come out with a very strict framework that needs to make all the information pertaining to these corporations public, so that the public can engage the same way we did engage during the finance bill.
Okay. The other concern is that the fact that Parliament may not be involved in this process. By the President signing the new Privatization Act, it bypassed the Parliament, and so this decision will be made at the executive level. Are you concerned that without parliamentary scrutiny, it leaves a lot of room for corruption, probably?
I think, first of all, we have to understand that which doesn't mean that it is necessarily justifiable, that the reason they cut out Parliament is basically to try and make the process faster, because we know that because of our constitution and the requirement that we as the people should be involved in all these matters, I think the president was just being coy, or the government was being clever by cutting out that particular process and making it much more straightforward and faster for particular reasons. I think my colleague here has mentioned the IMF and the World Bank. I know they are currently our favorite whipping boys, because we know that the situation that we are in, we need every shilling from anywhere and everywhere. That is the context that we are operating from. So from that perspective, then we must understand why there is that pressure to make sure that we collect as many shillings as possible from anywhere and everywhere, including the sale of assets. The good thing is that the president, when he took oath of office, he made that very clear from the very, very beginning that one of the things he intends to do is to collect money by selling some of the Nini. But that conversation has always been there. It is just that now it has been accelerated for obvious reasons. So the question of cutting out Parliament, of course, raises a very, very serious concern in terms of course, they are the watchdog for the public. They are supposed to supervise and superintend these processes to make sure that some of those funny businesses that politicians and bureaucrats are known for do not creep into this process. So from that perspective, yes, it's a valid concern, but at the same time, we also have to understand that sometimes the reason we are here is because Parliament has been known to sort of drag out the process, and we don't really need that at this particular point in time.
The issue of, on one hand, you've cut out Parliament, but then you invite the public to share their views on this.
You don't engage in conveniency and try to abort the requirements of a constitutional process or requirement of a legal framework. Of an ideal framework of governance to certain these processes. Well, I think sometimes the executives have been very, strategic on political on how they engage, whether they want to engage Parliament, because some of these particular proposals have been taken directly to Parliament, and ignore the will of the people in public participation. And of course, that has found its way into court. People have litigated on why the public have been left aside and taken straight to Parliament. If in essence, I think parliamentarians should be receiving the views from the public and debate, and vote on depending on what the public says. Because in fact, Parliament ideally is a delegated, people has delegated their power to the legislature. So I foresee a situation where in some time there might be a push and pull again between the two houses and the executive with regards to how these executive try to overstep their mandate and bypass the Parliament. One of the things I've seen again, still talking about this Privatization Act, you asked about these questions. Then how would you determine the procedures of how to sell a public asset? And I think the law is still very, fluid when it comes to what are the procedures? How did you settle on KICC? How did you settle on selling the Kenya Pipeline Corporation and the Kenya Literature Bureau of, so I think one of the things, the proposals is like, when a company is making losses, because they're saying, if it's making losses, if it has got outdated machines and, and the government still continue to pump their monies in, and they're not getting profit into it, then I think is earmarked for sale. Which brings in the question, you've not only even asked how the control of budget, didn't have a say or an opinion in all this particular decision that was made by the executive. So if we interrogate the procedures of how the executive arrived into that, then you'll find that not only Parliament as an institution, but you'll find that other bodies their opinion has not been sought after in arriving into these kind of decisions.
And of course, that question of public participation is one that is key. We seem to be using it and banding around that phrase because even in that issue of the National Dialogue Committee, there was a lot of public participation, but probably is not what ended up on that report. We'll be looking at that and a lot more after the break. Remember, you can continue interacting with us on social media, on X at TV47 News and on Facebook, TV47 Kenya. You're watching Morning Cafe. Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Ndimuli. We continue looking at the headlines with my panelists, Daniel Orogo, John Wangunyu, and Francis Wanjiku. Also joining the panel this morning, Mundalo Advice, National Youth Chairperson, Jubilee Party. It's good to have you in studio, Bona Advice. Just before the break, we were looking at plans for privatization, and there's that issue that came up on public participation. And now I want us to move to another discussion, and this has to do with the NADCO report that was presented or made public on Saturday. And on this, there's also a lot of public participation. If you look at the report, it's close to 300 pages long, actually 296. Most of it is contains what was presented by the public to that committee. But the question is, how much of that participation or the ideas was captured in the final report? Hence my question on whether or not public participation is indeed consequential. But in this whole issue of the NADCO report, even before we look at the details, just how consequential were the talks? John, let's start with you.
First of all, my view has always been that NADCO was a waste of time. Eh? On this one, I agree with the Deputy President that I didn't expect something to come out of these talks, in the sense that, for me, I knew the talks was having two purposes. For the Azimio side, it was giving them an opportunity or something to do or to remain relevant. And then for the government side, it was about keeping these people off the street, keeping the Azimio guys and Maandamano off the street. So that is the sort of the background. So from there, I knew that for the reason that some of the proposals that were being made would end up in a referendum somehow, and that is something that I know the president would not allow, given the context of, especially when you think about the problems that the referendum caused Mwai Kibaki back in 2005. So for that particular reason, I knew that if we were to end up in a situation where we would need to go to a plebiscite, that government would not allow that. So from that perspective, I knew it was, what did Mother Kome say at the Supreme Court? It was a wild goose chase. So therefore, when you now return to the contents of what actually was released to the public, you realize that as much as there was these many presentations across so many very different issues, that the report, in a very simple word, was underwhelming, in the sense that if you look at a very critical issue like cost of living, nothing really concrete came out of that, or is contained in that, or the proposals that are contained there to help alleviate that particular problem or that particular issue are very, very weak. And in terms of how it's going to be operationalized, I don't see it happening anytime soon, or the context within which we are going to say, for example, remember Azimio was very, very vocal about reducing VAT on fuel. And then we ended up with, I don't know, reduce road maintenance levy. Given the things that are happening today to our infrastructure, I don't think they're going to touch or to reduce any of that amount, given that we need a lot of money to rebuild our infrastructure, especially after what is happening currently with the El Nino. So therefore, for me, it was a waste of time, and it basically now confirms that that is exactly what was happening, that we were simply wasting time, wasting resources. And unfortunately, again, I remember saying somewhere that this particular issue is very, very dangerous for Azimio, because if you look at the issues that Azimio brought to the table, they were not really substantive matters. The key things that government was looking at was the creation of the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the Leader of Opposition, and then the embedding of the three funds, the women funds, and so on and so forth. So those were the substantive issues.
And we'll come back and look at those, some of those highlights. But were we unreasonably expecting too much from these talks, especially on the matter of cost of living? Mundalo.
Thank you. I think for me, first of all, it would be an appreciation to the Kalonzo and Kimani Ichung'wah team, because at least they were able to have this dialogue all the way to its conclusive end. We haven't seen that in the past, because you see, when we started and having what was called the bipartisan talks, you saw the drama that came along with that. So I think even by the mere fact that we have had a leadership that has had this conversation to the end is a subject of appreciation. And then two, yes, there is the subject of public participation, and so many people are able to present their memoranda. And we were able to see these teams sit and listen to all these people. We were able to present what our thinking was, as well as the Jubilee Party. And I think it is far-fetched for us to always imagine that public participation means all ideas of the public being taken into account, because we are about 56 million Kenyans. If every one of us has to have their way, then you can imagine how big that document would be. Even as we already say, it's already 300 pages. So for me, it is about, first of all, that the process has been able to take place. And one of the things that has been able to even achieve is the state of calm in the country, because you have to remember at what point did this dialogue begin. We were at a place in this country where businesses, it's told, people are not going to work because of rampant demonstrations every now and then. So I come from the thinking that for as long as we can have an opportunity to talk and not be on the streets, that is a better opportunity. Okay. So this dialogue process, it might not, I do not agree with it entirely. There are some proposals I don't agree with entirely, but you have to remember that in the presentation of the recommendations, themselves were able to say some of these things we are not also able to agree, and we have forwarded them to what would be our principles for further deliberation. Mm-hmm. Simply means that they were also aware that there's also the reality that they came with. They came with the reality that it's not everything that was agreed upon. So sometimes we rush into being very pessimist in our thinking, because there are things I agree with entirely in the report, like the creation of the Office of the Opposition Leader. Yes, we might have people who would say it is for politicians. But the issue is this country, every time there is a problem, we have always felt like there is a weakness in the opposition. Mm-hmm. When there is an opportunity to create the Office of the Opposition Leader, again, I want to say that is purely for politicians. What I do not agree with is the creation of 2 deputies for the Office of the Opposition Leader, because I wonder between the work of running the country as president and the work of opposition leader, which one would actually need 2 deputies? Mm-hmm. And you look at the Office of the Prime Minister, he doesn't have a deputy at all. So I would not agree with the 2 deputies, maybe 1, but I would agree with the creation of the Office of the Opposition Leader, because that is the reality we have as a country. Okay. We cannot be able to always run away from our own issues every time we have a chance to deliberate about them.
Okay, and Francis, as Mundalo says, it is not possible that this one attempt at dialogue would resolve all our issues. If you were to assess the success rate of the National Dialogue Committee, how would you rate it, 0 to 100?
Unfortunately, I'll put it at 0. And the sad part is, I think the National Dialogue is a joke taken too far. I don't think it should have gone even to the point of calling itself a dialogue committee, because these are 2 sides of political divide sitting down and having a conversation. Therefore, there's nothing national about it. Just because 2 opposing sides are meeting doesn't bring it out of context that this is a national dialogue. And it's very important that Kenyans understand that we are not in a constitutional making moment. We are not trying to make any constitution. So let's avoid this conversation that, okay, we can come up with an opposition leader position, we can come up with a prime minister position, let's form another 3 or 4 counties. We are not in that position yet, because
why are we not in that position? It is 13 years later after we promulgated the Constitution. Surely we can review it.
Yes, absolutely. We are allowed to review it, but every democracy requires its constitution to mature. We are 13 years, and I can tell you, go ask your governor, go ask your MCA, ask them, have we implemented this constitution? All of them will tell you no. Mm-hmm. And there are good reasons why we have not implemented the constitution. It's because we have actual politicians who have delayed that implementation. Today, if you look at the El Nino, governors are still complaining they are not receiving funds. And why is that? It's because no one is implementing the constitution. So at what point did the Azimio or the Kenya Kwanza decide that we are in a constitutional making moment, and therefore we need to reform this constitution?
Daniel, yet there have been several attempts to try and amend this constitution, meaning that that conversation is alive, both in Parliament and outside. And some of those people who have been at the forefront of pushing for constitutional review are people who are key in making of this constitution. The Third Way Alliance, Ekuru Aukot, was on the committee of experts and other people. If at all this NADCO process has not achieved anything else, it has managed to revive the discussion about the possibility of relooking at some of the provisions of this constitution. Isn't that in itself a positive?
Well, I'm surprised at the rate at which my colleague can rate the dialogue process at 0. We are all aware, and advice has alluded to the history, of post-electoral violence that we've always witnessed. And it's like we live in a country where we know the outcome of what probably might happen after the elections. There has been an attempt to try to solve contentious issues, after elections. The other time we sat on this panel and we were arguing whether we have a political crisis or we have a constitutional crisis, or what else is the problem that is ailing Kenya. And it seems that we have not really found political solutions to this country, that we always want to have political solutions being solved through constitutionally, or rather constitutional issues being solved politically, and vice versa. So may I first commend the team that sat down together after the failed bipartisan talk, by the two teams that were given mandate on May, and then the other team took up the mandate in August. They have done exceedingly well by the fact that I have seen over submissions, 250 almost submissions that were submitted, diverse opinions from Kenyans, both different political angles, different institutions, different professionals giving their view. I mean, Fred, the people would have sat somewhere and say that we've all, been in this country. We are no longer going to have this kind of conversation. Like you've alluded to, the Constitution is over 10 years. And Wakili knows that there is an opportunity to amend the Constitution. And I was hoping that he was going to use the opportunity, maybe just to, agree that it's time that we amend this Constitution. Some of these clauses of this Constitution are not keeping to update with the current context that we are facing as a country. And in America, that is over 500 years mature democracy, are still struggling with their constitution and the separation of powers, whether the executive or the president should be appointing the judges of the Supreme Court. Yet their constitution is mature over 100 years and so. What about a constitution that is less than 20 years? So I think it could be a bit unfair for us to say that indeed it's not time to look at the contentious issues to amend the Constitution, like some of these proposals that have been made by the Dialogue Committee. But equally, one of the things that I also agree with is that who is in the center of this conversation of always a time to look keenly to our Constitution. And like you've said, as we go through, some of these amendments that have been proposed, we probably look at the context and the content of those particular, proposals. Then at that level, we're going to judge whether we put the works of this committee at 0 or 50 or 100.
Okay. But apart from new proposals of how to change this constitution, there's also the issue of provisions of this constitution that are yet to be implemented, that this National Dialogue Committee went into as well. The issue of the 2/3 gender rule. At least on that one, they came up with a proposal, whether it's viable or not. Don't you think that that in itself means that at least it was consequential? The fact that there are now proposals and probably even political goodwill to ensure that some of these provisions that are yet to be implemented are done so now.
We've been somehow having these conversations over the last couple of years. I would like to remind people that we were here with the BBI. Yes, and what NADCO has done is essentially, I characterize it as BBI 2.0. And most of the issues that were discussed or the presentations that were made to that committee actually echo everything that was in the BBI, and we know how that ended. It is true that when you look at these issues from a certain angle, it is true that there has always been that conversation about the full implementation of our constitution as is today. But we know that there are gaps in terms of, and of course my co-panelists have discussed this or have raised this issue of whether, say for example, using the example of counties and the functions that are supposed to be served by counties. We know that that has not been done fully. So how then are we having this discussion about changing other clauses? And yet, the big elephant in the room, I wish that we were in a situation where we've fully implemented the Constitution, or somehow fully, and then now we are talking about new things, rather than piling things on top of the other. And we know, especially for me, the consequence is what is giving me all this skepticism, in the sense that the same issues about that made BBI fail, BBI 1.0 to fail, is exactly the same issues in this particular issue. And that basically from projection, you can say that it's going to fail also. So for me, that is why I think we should first of all concentrate on implementing the current constitution as is, at least to some extent of fullness, before we start talking about new things or adding new things to the
need for political goodwill in any attempt to either fully implement the provisions of the Constitution as it is, or even attempt to change any provision. There's the need for political goodwill is key. And probably this roundtable discussion, the NADCO, one of the effects is that it brought together two sides of the major divide. Don't you think that that probably is a positive, that it could revive the conversation about full implementation of the Constitution?
I don't think so, because the Constitution created its own mechanism of implementation, and the Constitution is implemented by the state. And what do I mean by the state? I mean, on one part, it's the executive in charge of implementation, and the legislature through proposals, legislative proposals. So when you see both the legislature and the executive raising up their hand and saying we do not have the kind of goodwill that requires for us to implement this constitution, it means that they do not deserve to be in office, because they have handed over their work to a national dialogue committee. And let me point out another example of weakness. The greatest weakness in the National Dialogue Committee for me is the act by the ruling party, which is the Kenya Kwanza, going into the national dialogue with issues. I mean, Kenyans elected you by a majority. Why are you taking your issues to the opposition? I mean, it is unlike state power.
Are you saying there's no room for caucusing across the aisle?
No. When you are exercising state, there's a reason why Kenyans go out during voting day to vote for a president. They are giving you all the power and authority to exercise sovereign power on their behalf. So when you go and take to the opposition a proposal, you want to create an office of a prime cabinet secretary, you are looking like the weakest president we have in history. The only thing you need to do as a president is to take that proposal to your attorney general to give you legal advice. Once the attorney general has approved that proposal, take it to parliament. Whether it is you can caucus in parliament or not is another discussion. But going into a dialogue as government and telling the opposition, I am unable to pass this proposal to parliament, it shows, one, that the president is unable to govern, and secondly, that he should resign from office.
Wow. Your reaction to that?
I think first of all, there is nothing like the president took any matter to opposition, because the dialogue committee was not an opposition committee. It was a committee that was put up to deliberate on Kenyan issues by Kenyans. So a president who chooses to involve others in decision making, a president who chooses to listen to everyone, a president who chooses to have a committee that can be able to listen to the Kenyans who chose him, so that he can be able to implement their wishes, cannot be described as a weak president. I think that is extremely far-fetched. And on the subject of the Constitution again, you know, Fred, just because you went to the garage and you are told that your car will need service after 5,000 kilometers, doesn't mean when you see an oil leakage, you don't handle it until after 5,000 kilometers. Mm-hmm. So you cannot be able to say that we can't sit and say we are not in a place where we need to review or do any adjustment on our constitution. Remember, this constitution is supposed to be serving us and not the other way around. So the people are the bosses of this constitution. The constitution is there for us and not we for the constitution. So when we feel like there is something that we can be able to make better on the constitution to serve us even better, we do it immediately.
Okay.
Because it is there to serve us. So it's not a question of how long. And then someone would ask, how long is the right time? Because Dan has just talked about the American Constitution, for instance, and it has come all that way. Today, we are dealing with transitioning from the 844 system to the CBC. It is not because the 844 was fully implemented, because we are at a situation where we are still transitioning, but there are schools in this country that had never seen a laboratory. Now, do we anchor on that and then do nothing about progress? We don't do that. So the mere fact of, and sometimes we have this burden of imagination that our ideas are the best, and if they are not the ones that are on the table, then those ideas on the table are not national ideas. We have to come from the understanding that all of us in this country have a brilliance of ideas, and people, no one has the monopoly of good thought. Because sometimes we think someone has monopoly of good thought. We have many people. The team that has sat there is a team of Kenyans, is a team of seasoned leaders. Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka has been in the governance of this country for way over 30 years. Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah is serving, I think, the second term in parliament. So these are seasoned people who are there. So we cannot imagine that our ideas are the best and their ideas are inconsequential. Sometimes we have to learn to be led. We have to learn to agree with whoever is there and see what can we make better from what they are proposing. Because tomorrow we will have one of us on the team on the same conversation, because everybody cannot be there. Today, Indimuli must lead this conversation at TV47. It's not because no one else can do it, but we cannot have 56 million Kenyans coming to sit there to be moderators of a show. So the thing is, we must first of all accept that there will be one leader at a time, that a time will come when we will have to work within the structures that are already laid out. That when somebody is given an opportunity, let us look at what is the problem. For instance, like what I said, that I do not agree with the creation of two deputies for an opposition leader. So let us be able to canvass the agenda. These are the things that are there. What do we agree with, what don't we agree with, and how can it be made better? But we cannot be able to, in wholesome, say the entire process is useless. And that's why I do not even agree with some of the leaders who are part and parcel of the process, and now they want to go out and complain in funerals. That is purely political expediency, because you cannot be part and parcel of the process, draw allowances from the taxpayer, led by Honorable Jeremiah Kioni. You draw allowances from the taxpayer, you be part of the process to its conclusion, then you get out and say you do not agree with it. What do you want us to do?
Let's now look at some of the proposals made by the National Dialogue Committee. And of course, advice has mentioned some. The other one that could be contentious and probably raise a lot of eyebrows is a proposal on how to fully implement the 2/3 gender rule. The proposal to double the number of women representatives from 47 to 94. Or the second option is to simply fill up the numbers through political parties until that 2/3 gender rule is met. This is one of the most contentious issues, and one that the courts have pronounced themselves on the matter. No one has been able to come up with a proper formula. Now, this is that the kind of answer or proposal you expected from the NAD?
Of course, I think there was going to be a staggering on the proposals on how to fill up the 2/3 gender issue. That reminds me of, I think there was a retreat advice that we had in Sagana with the political parties, young people in political parties, and there was a debate on whether do we have an infill of the 2/3 gender rule, or do we have a progressive attainment of this? It was a very sober debate sometimes, in a platform that we shared with Advice way in Sagana months ago. I think there is a sense in which this government really tries to, like I said, try to stagger in, bring up the 2/3 gender rule in the anticipation to whip up a certain constituency. in the anticipation of some things, which I think the proposal for me is it a matter of a progressive representation at a certain time, or is it a matter of an infill? So for me, I think these two proposals, and like you said, the court had pronounced themselves on the issue of two-thirds gender rule. It failed, I don't know how many times in Parliament, several times, being shut down, and fingers points at different. Even if the two political parties, bigwigs by that time, they were able to whip up, their constituencies to vote, but still voted in their presence, voted against these particular proposals. So I think I still retain the issue of two-thirds gender rule as a progressive issue, that it has to be attained, and then the political parties could probably propose some of these particular proposals. So for me, I still see that is no solution. I still see go with the court issue to allow for attainment of two-thirds gender progressive issue. But again, Fred, the other thing that I've equally seen, and I don't know whether you would point it out at this particular time, is with the issues of IEBC. I don't know whether you'll come to it.
Before we come to the IEBC, on this issue of the two-thirds gender rule.
For me, I think, like I've said, when it goes to two-thirds, my proposal is to have it as a progressive issue.
John.
Yes.
Yes, but just before I come to the question you're asking, let me just make a quick comment about the questions around the NADCO issue. If you look at the participants themselves, the people who are at the heart of this process, starting with Jeremiah Kioni, I think the day before yesterday, or was it yesterday, he sought to walk back on these issues. Before that, there was Eugene Wamalwa, and then before that, there was the running mate to Baba. That they all seem to sort of try to walk back or walk away from what essentially they've been part and parcel of for the entirety. So to try and you can sort of understand where the lack of faith in this particular process comes from. It stems from that particular, that is testament to what exactly is going on. As far as the two-thirds gender rule is concerned, that's a very, very sort of sensitive issue. We know that at the moment on the president's desk, not necessarily William Ruto, but on Uhuru, the predecessor, there is the Maraga advice to dissolve Parliament, and because of this very same issue. And we know that it continues to pertain up to today. So the question becomes, how do we handle that matter? That, yes, theoretically, it's a good thing to have as many women, because essentially that is what is going on, that women have been excluded from the decision-making table and all these other places where power and authority is exercised. So how do we include more women? And that is a big question that I think we are grappling with, and it's a good thing that we're grappling with, but how are we going to do it? My view is that it's going to take time, so therefore it's going to be a progressive process, but at the same time also we must sort of have conversations around how we can do it through political parties, because I think that is the best way to, through nominations, for example, that we allow for, say, for example, women candidates to come through, so that when we are giving the people options to vote for, they have them, rather than this idea of setting aside seats, because that in itself will create a lot of problems with the public in terms of why expand Parliament, why expand county assemblies, and so on and so forth. So for me, yes, it's going to be a progressive thing. You cannot legislate on it, because you cannot force people to vote in a certain way or in a certain direction, because that is against what democracy stands for. So the question then becomes, how do we do it? And for me, like I'm saying,
the proposal is the number of women representatives?
No. That's a wrong approach. Let's do it through political parties.
What's your take on that? Before we move to the issue of changing the system of governance as well.
I think there is no political goodwill to ensure that we meet the two-thirds gender rule as stipulated in the Constitution. The expectation by the Constitution is that for nominative position, it will be a direct issue that does not require any legislation. Because if Fred is the president, then you are appointing your cabinet. It's expected that at least a third of them are women. Also, apart from women, you have the youth and persons with disability. So the fact that we do not see that in the current cabinet, it means that there is no political goodwill and nothing will change about it. On the second issue is that the two-thirds gender rule also extends to elective positions. We have seen government and opposition all come up with proposals on how to do this. Any legislative proposal that includes changing of the constitution is null and void from the very beginning, because there is no expectation to change the constitution in order to meet the two-thirds gender rule.
He says there's no expectation to change the constitution, yet it is Kenyans who are giving these proposals, meaning that a few Kenyans feel it's time to change the constitution. On this issue of changing the system of governance, it is probably one of the biggest shifts from a pure presidential system to a system where we now want to introduce leader of official opposition, prime minister's position, sort of a hybrid. That in itself would change the structure of government significantly, and probably that is the one thing that could lead us or necessitate a referendum. Yes. Do you think it is a conversation that is timely, because some of these proposals come from the president himself, who Wangunyu says is not keen on a referendum at this time?
I think this conversation is timely because we have to come from a very honest understanding that as a country, most of the time, we suffer the problem of the software that runs the country, the problem of nationhood, because there are several things that have been done in thinking that these would be able to advance the conversation that will make everyone feel included. But we have continued to have the problem where inclusivity for us as a country means certain personalities from our forte at the very top. Devolution was not able to cure that, because we thought that now with the advent of devolution and the resources now coming down to the counties, we will have the thinking of many people feeling like we are now very represented, we have the resources, we have very little interest on what happens at the top. But we have seen that that is actually not possible. You look at the 2022 election, and immediately after the election, we were able to have thousands of Kenyans on the streets. Not necessarily, I do not necessarily believe that the driving force was majorly the issues that were being raised, but the people and the person that was leading them to the street. And once you're able to see that Honorable Raila Odinga sits down and accepts that we can have a dialogue, then there is a whole half of a country that accepts that the dialogue process is the right thing to do. So that essentially shows you that as a country, we're still struggling with representation at the top level. So in as much as we would want to look at this as an allocation of seats to politicians, I think that would be a very, very pedestrian way and simplistic way to look at it. Because once we are able to have the official office of the opposition, for instance, the person who comes second in an election, there is less bile, because there is somewhere they then are able to go to. Because what has created the bile that continues to move around is because someone has almost half the number of votes. Like if we use the previous election, for instance, it's a 200,000 difference. And that person has nowhere to go. That person has to just disappear somewhere. Him, together with the rest of their supporters, there will definitely be some bile. But once there is a place where these people go to and they can be able to really participate and be part and parcel of the process of the governance and just making the country a better place, I think then that works. I think that is the reason why we are having those proposals of having an official opposition leader, having a prime minister. It's basically to cure what I would call the nationhood problem, the software problem that we have as a country.
The main reason why we went to the attempt to actually review our constitution, the independence constitution, was to try and resolve some of these things that probably even as a country, John, we are not even sure what kind of governance system really works for us. And it's an opportunity for us to craft our own design of governance. The fact that we are disagreeing on whether to go fully presidential, parliamentary, or have a hybrid is something that we have had to contend with for a very long time. It is one of those opportunities that we have to actually fix that or try a different system of governance. Don't you think that this is the way to go?
If you, the thing is this, sort of to flip what he's saying, about losers and winners of elections. If you look at these characters, the leaders at the moment, particularly for the presidential position, you'll notice that they've always shifted depending on where they are. So we started off with a parliamentary system because that would be sort of attainable in the sense that, of course, we know it is through parliament, so the numbers in parliament will determine who becomes the prime minister, and then the prime minister becomes the head of government. But again, variables change, and then you notice that, oh, presidential system is very good because you have all the power, sort of an imperial president, which we are saying from conversations as Kenyans that we do not want an imperial president. But somehow it is a desirable position to have because once you have all that power and what it means in terms of authority, then it becomes desirable. So there is that sort of disingenuous conversation that we are having and saying that we sort of switch and change depending on where we stand. That, I think, is not right. Number two, when you think about the issue of the presidential election, we need to find a way of taking all that attention away from the presidential seat, because I wonder, I always ask myself, if you look at the contested seats across the country, I think there is over 2,000 positions that are contested for. MCAs, women representatives, governors, and so on and so forth. But nobody ever has a conversation or brought the idea of that, say, for example, if we were to use Nairobi as an example, I have not had any single person talking about a negotiated settlement between the current governor and the person who lost.
Are we wrong in
how are we
seeking that kind of agreement or arrangement where, at least for the presidential seat, the winner does not take it all, that probably the second one gets something else? Are we wrong in seeking that kind of conversation?
Yes, I will. I'll be direct and answer that question. Yes, in the sense that we have rules of engagement when it comes to electoral politics, and we know how it works. So I fail to understand why we are using a different standard when it comes to the presidential election. Mm-hmm. That is something that I hope I would find somebody who could answer that for me. Why do we use a different standard for the presidency? Yet it's a position, as much as it's the most powerful position in the country, that the same standard should apply to what happens with an MCA position.
Okay. On that debate of inclusivity, which we've carried on for so long, there's always the issue of cost, that if we are top heavy, then it would cost the country too much. But then again, if we do not resolve, there are also costs associated to that.
Yes, the cost of a contested decision in election where people are up in violence because of the disagreement of elections outcome, versus the cost of maintaining, introducing or embedding that particular decision. Fred, this conversation is not the first time it's appearing. I mean, like my advice has talked about, when you're looking at this conversation, now the current defense CS, I think you've read his book when he was talking about On the Record, and giving why there was a fallout between William Ruto of then, who was in the ODM, and the former premier. It was on the issues of how would the support of having a supreme president or a presidential position versus the parliamentary position, and what was the stance of ODM. I think if you read through the book, that was the beginning of that kind of fallout between the two. It surfaced and come back again when there was a conversation about BBI, and I don't know why my colleague is saying that BBI 1 and BBI 2 now. You see, the anticipation that in the introduction of devolved system of governance, that would cure this obsession with the winner takes it all. We had thought as a country that when we devolve resources and power and responsibilities, then we were going to take away the too much concentration that has always been in the presidency of this country. However, what we didn't realize is that some of these particular instruments or responsibilities were not devolved to the counties. And therefore, there is still a concentration on who becomes the president of the country. Where are they coming from? what ethnicity, and all these things of what forms a national, like you're saying, the lack of statehood and the nation building. But I think, Fred, also on the other end, we thought that if then that is the case, then another issue would come in, that is the separation of powers. That the executive, that the judiciary would be able to affirm a decision, that the executive, head of executive, who is the president, would not be a solo president and rule with supreme authority. And therefore, parliament would cut the clips and the judiciary would equally affirm their decision. That realization, again, that was too ideal and is not realistic. And therefore, we still realize that there is still an obsession with who comes the presidency of this republic. And therefore, this conversation, because my colleague is asking, trying to understand why. So for me, I would propose that apart from introducing and embedding the position of the official opposition, and by the way, the official opposition now becomes official, that if a running mate, the president, there is a declaration of the votes, and the second, who comes second, generally assumes the position of the official opposition, then again I would also request that that particular individual still hold a position, either as a member of parliament or as a senator. I keep on referring to the United States, where we've borrowed a lot of the Constitution and all these powers. Senator McCain in 2008 elections, while he lost to President Obama, did not lose his position as Arizona senator. He led Republicans in the. So I think this particular issue really needs to be looked into retrospect in a lot of issues.
Do you think that would be able to resolve the kind of problem or challenges we have with the current parliament? That it seems to have ceded too much to the executive, that there are no controls, there are no powerful, in terms of leadership within the minority and majority side, to be able to stand its ground and oversight the executive, that by having the official leader of opposition, that probably that failure would be remedied?
Fred, this is a very difficult conversation to have, because I don't think we are telling Kenyans the truth. I don't think we have a problem in terms of system of governance or a lack of an office of the leader of opposition. The truth is that we have a Raila Odinga problem. What do we do with Raila Odinga every 5 years in between election? What does this man, how do we keep him busy? So that is the problem. And if we had given ChatGPT a chance to translate this dialogue committee report, the problem statement is how do we help Raila? And that's why you see the issues that are being raised in the first 2 points are electoral justice, and also issues to do with how do you appoint IEBC. Truth be told, if you look at the report, there's nowhere in the report they congratulate IEBC for having a very good election. It has been 1 year after the election. Fred, none of us has seen any by-election. It means that no election has been overturned by our courts.
But there are quite a number of, I think, 2 ward elections that
still pending.
Yes, they are still pending.
Issues and,
they are still pending.
Yeah.
None of them has been determined that we should go for a by-election. So out of all the election, out of the 6 election in every county that IEBC held, we can only point to less than 10 on wards. So it means that IEBC did a very good job. But why are we discussing IEBC that did a good job in terms of reforms? It means that we are wondering, okay, what if the next presidential candidate comes and complains about IEBC? That is our problem. So I think the moment we get the problem statement right, that is when we'll have the correct answer.
Okay.
Yes.
Fred.
And because of time, as we wrap up,
allow me to interject 1 minute.
That issue of IEBC, yes.
Not the issue of the IEBC. It's just a question I had. What's his name? Bob Mkangi asking somewhere, and I would like to pose it to everybody that is watching, and of course to my co-panelists. He asked, how do we envision that position of the official leader of opposition working? And who is he going to be engaging? Because if he's going to be sitting in parliament, we know the president is an executive one and does not sit in parliament. So who will this official leader of opposition be engaging in parliament? Is it majority leader? Is it because the president does not sit in parliament, so how is he going to work? Yes.
Okay.
So that is my interjection. Yes.
Okay. Now, as you make your final remarks, because of time, on this issue of the IEBC, of the reconstitution of the IEBC, which was also a major agenda of the National Dialogue Committee. Remember, there are so many things that are yet to happen. The delimitation of boundaries, which they mention in their report somewhere. The deadline was to be in March next year. We don't look likely to meet that deadline. But according to the National Dialogue Committee, the IEBC shall, within 3 months of its reconstitution, develop internal guidelines delineating the administrative and policy responsibilities of the chairperson and commissioners, and institutional guidelines on administrative and policy functions. That question of how much power the chairperson of the IEBC has vis-a-vis the vice chair and other commissioners. Let's start from there, Bwana Advice, as we conclude.
Yeah, so just on that, and I would love to, just before I do that, my co-panelist talked about the problem statement being Raila Odinga, and I just wanted to tell him that, you see, the reason why it might be so is because of the following that person has. Yeah, it is not just that person has arrived today and he has become whatever he is. It's because of the following, and because that following is composed of Kenyans, then it must be discussed wholesomely. And then my brother also talked about why is the rationale different for the presidency and not for other positions? Why can't other positions also have an official leader of opposition and all that? And I would want to say it is about the burden of responsibility and the power that comes with an office. That is why, even I'm sure when you go to a parastatal or an organization like TV47, you might find the CEO having a PA and a deputy and a driver, but maybe not the producer of this show. It is because of the burden of responsibility of the office. So it is not about every office being equal and operating in equal terms as the other. Now, to the question of the IEBC, the power of the chair of the IEBC, in my view, I at some point felt the power is too much. But be that as it may, again, I do not foresee a situation where we want to create various centers of power in election management, because then we'll get into a bigger problem than we really are. Because at the end of the day, we must have somebody who we must trust to make a decision, and all of us must follow it. Imagine a situation where, like what happened in the previous election, where the equal power of the chair was in another person. And so the team that went to Serena was able to make a declaration that can also stand legally, and also Chebukati makes a decision that can also stand legally. I think that is a whole lot of confusion. So I do not think we need to water down the powers of the chairman, because at the end of the day, we simply need one person to make that decision. Okay. But also, I do not disagree with the issue of adding the number of the selection panel from 7 to 9, because if the two will be able to take care of some interests of the political divide, and that will be able to bring consensus in the country, so be it. I don't see a big problem with it.
Daniel, final remarks?
Well, I think for me, there are a number of proposals that were put forward to the reconstitution of IEBC. One that really struck me was a submission that was made by Professor Githu Muigai on different aspects of how that, for example, that they would take 2 people from the county, be a people-driven process. I keep advocating for that, because then if we are having an IEBC that is supposed to have a political resolution, at the apex of it, being reconstitution with a political process, then that becomes dangerous for a country. So the proposal that there needs to be 2 people from each and every country, I think that is 94, and then they would congregate and elect the members, the selection panel of the members. I think we should have that conversation, because that then looks like it's a people-driven process.
I'm just saying, to focus on some of on the reports and the proposals.
It is open for that kind of proposals. But all in all, I am saying whether it's being, because there was also another proposal to have the chair being appointed by the Public Service Commission, another proposal, different proposals that comes on board. My issue is that if we can have a conversation that brings an IEBC to a people-driven process, then I think that we can have that conversation for me. Lastly, my colleague mentioned that if you go to ChatGPT and, type the generative AI would really look at this particular dialogue issue and call it how to managing Raila Odinga. May you get reminded that before Raila occupies, the lead of opposition, there were Matibas. There were very people before, Orengos and the rest. So the issues of personalities, big personalities versus big institutions, whether some people are bigger than these institutions or whether those institutions cannot survive when those people leave. I think Kenya, we would delineate ourselves from this kind of conversation because they sometimes lead us into personalizing this position, in fact, personalizing the position of official opposition. Could we look at this conversation with Raila out of it? Or maybe somebody else, and how that institution can be sustained without not really big personality syndrome in occupying those positions,
Francis?
Fred, I want to say that we do not have an IBC problem. I think as a country we should congratulate Chebukati and his team for leading the IBC to a well-done elections. What we need to move on is to see how we can prepare for the next election or the next by-election by actually allowing the people who are allowed to select the next set of commissioners to do their job. One thing I'll advise the president of this country should stop behaving like a hostage victim. I'm tired of this conversation that Raila has made me do this, Uhuru has made me do that. I think one of the things his advisors should tell him is to grow up and take the battle to Kenyans. Let's move on as a country. Finally,
John Ombugu.
For me, it's a simple line. Let's follow the law. In the sense that one of my panelists earlier when we started talked about political problems and constitutional problems or legal problems. And we are conflating the two. We are trying to use the law to solve political problems, and sometimes political problems using the law. Let's follow the law. We know what the law says. We know there's a lot of work to be done. There's the delimitation sunset coming in March. We know that there are by-elections that should be conducted but cannot be done simply because we do not have an IEBC in place. Replacing or increasing the number of representatives in the selection panel and all that tinkering we are attempting is not going to change anything. It's not going to provide us political solutions because what we are having is a political problem. The Constitution will not help. The law will not help. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John Wangunyo, political analyst, Daniel Orogo, also political analyst, Francis Wanjiku, Head of Public Service, IC Law LLP, and Mundalo Advice, National Youth Chairman, Jubilee Party. Our panelists this morning as we look at the state of the nation on matters to do with the privatization of state corporations, as well as that report by the National Dialogue Committee.